talking to you in just a little while after the break. In the meantime, a very warm welcome to the studio to Talk TV presenter Joe Wheeler. Hi, Joe.
Hello there.
Now, we talked briefly through the vicissitudes of Zoom yesterday about Praia de Luz, Maddie McCann, and you're the person to talk to because you used to live in Praia de Luz and you were living there as a journalist, of course, the night she went missing. I mean, before we get into the details of what's happened since then, what are your memories of that night?
I have to be entirely honest, my memories of that night aren't particularly precise because I'd actually had a very bad riding accident on the Tuesday, and so I was rather laid up with bits of bone that were broken. So the first that I knew about it was the following morning when I got a telephone call asking me to go down and start reporting on it. And at that point I found out that many of my expat friends had been out the previous night. They were in the thick of it. They were out searching, calling her name. Everybody was looking for her. And, of course, by the following morning, it was massive. And so when I was reporting on it, of course, it was a Mark Warner resort, these that are famed for having hot and cold running childcare. Yeah. So the fact that these children were on their own in the first place was a bit of a shock. And also many of the Warner resorts are enclosed, which this one wasn't. Where the apartment was, it was on a public street with an alleyway next to it, and then fair enough, the rest of it where the tapas bar was, that was all fenced off, and the pool and everything else. So as the crow flies, it probably was visible from where the tapas 9 was sitting. But in terms of actually getting there, you had to come out of the gate and round the corner, and I was having quite a few problems making this understood because, as I say, this isn't exactly how the resorts are. And that first day, the reporters were starting to arrive from other countries, the camera crews and everything else. There was obviously a language issue between the Portuguese police and people who were turning up and the McCanns themselves, and the search parties were helpful because a lot of those living there also spoke Portuguese, so that was very helpful. And I think there was a feeling of disbelief, really, that this child had vanished seemingly into thin air.
So it was the 3rd of May 2007. Can it be that long ago? What is that? He said, really bad at maths.
16 years ago.
16 I was only ever good at expenses when it came to maths. 16 years. And so, of course, we're talking about this now because they've gone back to a reservoir that's inland from Praia de Luz. You were explaining yesterday that is amid miles and miles of wilderness, which is half of the problem, I suspect. Now, in terms of this search, they've searched this reservoir once before. They've said they've found items of interest. But let's be honest about this. I mean, if you searched any massive reservoir, you're going to find stuff, kids' things, all sorts of items, aren't you? I mean, I hope they find some sort of resolution for poor Jerry McCann and his wife, but, it's not likely, is it?
Well, of course, the Barragem has been searched at least twice before. Twice by the police in 2008, which, in terms of a time span...
It's more than once, is it? Yeah.
Oh, yes, absolutely. The police have been there twice. And I think, as I mentioned yesterday, I certainly knew of an independent team who'd been diving there. What seems to have sparked the interest in this area, and, of course, it wasn't just the lake. They've been interested in an area on land as well. So, obviously, there is this suspect, Christian B., who's currently in a German jail. And he was convicted of raping a 72-year-old woman in the Praia de Luz area. And that's why he's currently in jail, that and a few other offences. And he was known to be in the area at the time. Now, the police found pictures of the Barragem, certainly the banks of the Barragem, and that's a place that he used to go to cleanse himself, apparently. But there was also an English couple who saw a tribute on the centre of 3 boulders. A shrine. Now, this was 7 months after Madeleine went missing. They gave the photos to the Portuguese police, who did nothing about it. But later, when the German police were asking for information, they sent those pictures again, and this is what sparked this. And it looks, well, it's said to look like an arrow pointing to this area where Christian B. used to go and spend a lot of time. He had this VW camper van, and so he'd go there to spend some time on his own, as I say, to cleanse himself, which is an interesting expression. But bizarrely, 2 days later, this couple went back and this tribute had gone. And I mean, I'd have to ask myself, you know, if I had committed some heinous crime, would I really
go and
you know,
put a tribute
to it?
But,
sort of
but
X
the
marks the
interesting thing, yeah, you're right, and that's exactly what I was thinking. But at the same time, the location of the shrine is kind of interesting, isn't it?
Absolutely. And if that was, you know, you worked as a locator, you know, in other words, the divers were looking around that area. But I mean, who knows how far things could have drifted, you know, in that time. As they, at least 3 dives that I know of have taken place in the Barragem since Madeleine went missing, and nothing yet has been found.
Well, look, fingers crossed they do find something, but I can't say personally I'm that optimistic, and I think you all know what I'm talking about. I mean, it's hope against hope, isn't it? Tell us, you alluded to this yesterday, Joe, the sort of devastating effect it's had on the previously quiet and pretty much unknown little community of Praia de Luz where you lived.
It was massive. As I say, there's an expat community there, partly because there are 2 English schools, a wonderful primary school and a wonderful secondary school, both with fairly small numbers of children of multinationalities. So the English expat community was quite small, quite close-knit, and of course we lived in this sleepy little seaside town in the Algarve. I mean, it couldn't be more idyllic. It was absolutely beautiful. And our children had freedoms, you know, as they grew up, and they'd meet down at the beach and spend time kicking a ball on the sand or whatever. Suddenly it was like, no, we're not doing that anymore. There was an awful lot about the Madeleine McCann case, which threw up facts that we didn't know, such as I mentioned yesterday, the number of the number of sex offenders in the area. Yeah. Yes, not just British, you know, other nationalities too. And you suddenly think, whoa, hang on a second. You know, we've been letting our kids go out. The nightlife there starts very late. Even the cinema, I think, starts about 10:30, 11. So, I mean, you know, on the weekend, we'd have our kids come back by taxi. And suddenly you think, I'm not happy about that anymore. You know, and nights out rarely started before 11 o'clock. You know, and they had these parties that went on till dawn. I mean, fantastic, fun times, wonderful place. But then you just think, well, who is out there and how safe are they?
Yeah, remember that. I mean, you know, you're a nice little community, essentially ruined forever.
It was. And even in the house as well, because, you know, when we slept at night and it was very hot, we'd have the patio doors open, might have the shutters shut inside, but, you know, the doors were open. Not after that. Not only were the patio doors shut, but pieces of wood put down so they couldn't be shifted. You know, it put us into a state of terror, that's for sure.
Awful. I mean, I asked you this yesterday, Joe. Thanks for coming. It's been really interesting. But, you know, you've covered this story very closely, obviously, on the scene. What's your theory of what happened?
I think there are many, many theories about what happened. Obviously, one is that she was abducted. There was some question mark as to whether she came to harm in the apartment. You know, perhaps there was an intruder, there was an accident, and he then took her away. You know, it's really, really very hard to say and to pin down the facts. I mean, initially there was an original suspect who was a friend of ours, and I mean, that was pretty devastating. Obviously,
was that English guy
Robert
with his
Morat.
mum or something? He ended up on the front page of every paper.
Yes, absolutely.
Suspect number 1.
Yes,
poor guy.
I know, absolutely. And
you knew him.
Yes,
nice
absolutely.
Guy?
Yes.
So
he was actually the nephew of the guy who was project managing the refurbishment of our villa. Yeah. So we knew him well socially, and that was very hard to take, and obviously rocked the community. Now, Christian B didn't become a suspect until about 3 years ago. But just to let you know how small this community is, it turned out that he had been living in the Algarve in a property right next to my best mate and where I used to keep my horse. And in fact, we used to ride past the property every day. Literally every day.
So you may have seen him in your travels.
Quite likely. Quite likely.
Gosh. Well, listen, Joe, you know, I don't suppose we're ever going to, or I hope we do get a resolution to this story, but I don't think I'm out of step to say I don't think we ever will, to be honest with you, now that it's gone on for so long. But, you know, fingers crossed. And thank you so much, Joe. That was fascinating. Joe Wheeler there, Talk TV presenter, Praia de Luz resident, when back then on the 3rd of May 2007, poor little Maddie McCann went missing. Whatever happened to that girl? 0344 499 1000. When we come back, your calls. I'm Kevin O'Sullivan. This is Talk TV live from the Talk Radio studios.